The Forgotten Palace on the Edge, San Francisco's Cliff House. A palace on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, beauty on a cliff, and a place where everything can vanish in a single moment. Imagine it. Wind crashing into the rocks, waves lifting salty mist into the air. Inside, mirrors, balls, champagne. Outside, the abyss and the sea. A dream house that dies again and again. Fires, an explosion, a storm, bankruptcy. Each time, a new promise. Each time, new ashes. Owners change, the city changes. Advertising, gambling, saints and swindlers under one roof. Next door, the fantasy of the millionaire Sutro. Bathhouse labyrinths of glass and steel. And then, silence, ruins, locked doors. People stand in the wind and ask what really happened here. Was it just bad luck on the edge of the earth, or someone's will? Why did a palace that was meant to live forever remain only on postcards and in other people's memories? And most importantly, what is stronger, the sea, the fire, or the human desire to build on the edge of an abyss? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Chapter 1. Opening Shot. Edge of the World. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Today's story takes us to a place where Gilded Age ambition met the cold patience of the Pacific. A ridge where palaces rose and fell with almost mechanical regularity. The address is 1600 Great Highway, San Francisco. The year is 2020. Maya Rodriguez pulls to the curb and steps into the wind. Before her stands the Cliff House, shuttered. Windows dark, doors locked. The ocean beyond keeps roaring, paying no mind to human plans or losses. Mr. Alvarez meets her at the side entrance. He has worked here for 30 years, bartender, manager, keeper of stories. In his hands, a cardboard box. Inside, laminated menus, matchbooks from rooms long closed, a black and white photograph in a cracked frame. The photograph shows a building that no longer exists, on a cliff that is smaller now than it was then. Palaces can stand on cliffs, he says, handing her the box, and still fall. This is the story of the Cliff House. Not one building, but many. Not one dream, but a chain of them, each raised over the ashes of the last. A restaurant that opened in 1863 as a modest white house perched on black volcanic rock at the edge of the continent. A destination that became legend. A business that burned, exploded, collapsed, and reopened so often that locals stopped counting. And a place that, in 2020, closed perhaps for the final time. Not with spectacle, but with the soft click of a lock and a cardboard box of memories. The Cliff House sits, or sat, at the far western edge of San Francisco, where the city ends and the Pacific begins. Point Lobos bends south. Seal rocks jut from the water like broken teeth, black and seemingly permanent. Land's End trails north, a path where hikers still walk the line between ground and emptiness. On clear days, you could see the Farallon Islands 27 miles offshore. On foggy days, most days, you saw only white. A drone rises now over the scene, the camera tilting down. The building clings to the cliff face. The waves below are patient. The rocks are older than nations. The structure, cream-colored stucco, red tile roof, loosely Spanish revival in its present form, looks both enduring and fragile, the way all human work looks against geologic time. The story begins in 1863. The California gold rush had ended, but San Francisco was still dizzy with momentum. The city had leapt from roughly 1,000 residents in 1848 to 25,000 by 1850. Money flowed. Ambition flowed. People looked west toward the ocean and asked what could be built there at the edge of the world, a white house on a black cliff. That was the first cliff house, simple, wooden, perched above seal rocks. The builder's name is lost to time. The reasons for building, ambition, speculation, the American impulse to plant a flag on dramatic ground are clearer. People came. At first, by carriage, later by streetcar, to stand at the edge and watch the seals. They ate, they drank. They stared into the open water and felt the jolt of awe. Maya lifts the menus and finds a letter at the bottom of the box. The paper is brittle, yellowed, water-stained. The date in the upper right reads, January 1907. The ink is faded but legible. The edges are darkened, not just with age, but with smoke. She reads the first line. I watched it burn from the ferry. The letter stops mid-sentence. The rest is ash. Chapter 2. Boomtown Breath. The letter in Maya's hands ties together two fires, two endings, separated by decades. But to understand why anyone built at Land's End at all, we have to rewind. We need the city that rose from mud and ambition faster than any other in American history. James Marshall finds gold at Sutter's Mill. News spreads like fever. Men abandon farms, shops, families. Ships anchor in San Francisco Bay, their crews vanishing inland in pursuit of rumor and luck. Hulls sit idle and rot. A settlement that barely existed detonates into life. The numbers make the surge impossible to ignore. In 1848, San Francisco holds roughly 1,000 residents. By 1850, 25,000. By 1852, closer to 36,000. An instant city thrown up on hope, speculation, and the gravity of gold. Winter streets turn to mud, summer streets to dust. Buildings rise in weeks, wood frames, canvas roofs, conviction instead of foundations. Yet gold alone does not explain the cliff house. Money is only part of it. The newly rich needed places to spend, to be seen, to pretend to civilization at the lip of wilderness. The city pushed west. In the 1870s, Golden Gate Park opened, about 1,000 acres of deliberate green rolled over dunes, a declaration that San Francisco would have beauty, culture, and Sunday destinations for families in their best clothes. Streetcar lines followed. By the 1880s, you could ride from downtown to the ocean for a few cents. The trip took under an hour. The destination, Seal Rocks, Ocean Beach, the Cliff House, became a weekly ritual. On summer Sundays, thousands arrived. They watched the seals bark and scrap on the reefs. They ate oysters, drank beer, and leaned into a wind that never tired. By day, the Cliff House wore respectability. Families, children with sticky hands, women clutching hats, the gusts tried to steal, men discussing proper matters over proper meals. By night, a different register. Backroom gambling, strong drink, whispered deals, money changing hands beneath tables. Reputation in early San Francisco was fluid. The city was too young, too rough, too recently invented to insist on fixed rules. Numbers crept onto menus and posters. Streetcar fare, 5 cents. Summer footfall, anything from 500 on dull weekdays to 5,000 on holiday Sundays. The Cliff House expanded. More rooms, a larger dining hall. The original White House grew turrets, porches, and the fussy skyline people called gingerbread. Victorian exuberance carved in wood, painted white, set on volcanic rock with the Pacific as proscenium. Photographs from the 1870s and 1880s show a structure both solid and improbable. 3 stories, clapboard siding, bay windows staring out to water, a wraparound porch where visitors point toward the seals. The building clings to the cliff with visible resolve. Behind it, rock and surf. Before it, people, hundreds on busy days, buttoned into stiff formal clothes, posing at the continent's edge as if they had arrived at meaning itself. The city believed in progress then, believed geography could be negotiated, that the future would dwarf the past. The Cliff House embodied that faith. It was not just a restaurant but a promise, a declaration that San Francisco faced the ocean and the ocean faced San Francisco, and that the bargain between them would be profitable and permanent. Streetcars ran every 15 minutes on weekends. Oysters came fresh from the bay. Champagne, so the advertisement swore, came from France. The view came free. Stand at the window, look west, see only water running to Asia. Feel the floor tremble when a heavy wave struck the rocks below. Feel alive, feel modern, feel part of something built to last forever. Except, of course, it would not. Chapter 3. The Dynamite Night. Forever in San Francisco has always been negotiable. The city learned that lesson again and again. The Cliff House learned it first in 1887, on a night when the water itself seemed to detonate. January 16th, 1887. Evening. The Cliff House is full. Sunday diners lingering over late courses, gas lamps throwing warm halos against the winter dark. The ocean is rough, but not unusually so. The wind carries salt. Seals on the rocks below bark their ordinary complaints. Everything is routine, until it is not. The blast arrives without warning. A shock wave punches through the building, rattling every window, skating glassware off linen, stopping conversations mid-word. Witnesses would later struggle to name the sound, coming from the water, from the dark, from everywhere at once. Boom. Then a held breath of absolute silence, as if the world paused to measure the damage. Then the screams. Then the bright crash of glass on floor. Diners surge toward the windows. Staff sprint for the doors. Outside, in thin lamplight, debris starts to fall. Splintered wood, twisted metal, shapes impossible to name, hissing into the waves. The air smells of sulfur and smoke. Somewhere out in the black water, catastrophe has found its mark. Rumors outrun facts. A steamer has gone up. A sea creature has struck. The cliff has collapsed. People crowd the porch, stare into the void, and find no proof of any story. The ocean keeps its rhythm, waves in, waves out, unimpressed by panic. The seals fall silent. The truth arrives slowly, first in fragments, then in full. A barge loaded with dynamite, the Parallel, carrying blasting powder for construction, had anchored off Point Lobos. Somehow the cargo ignited. The explosion was instant and total. The barge vanished. The shockwave ran across water and into stone. Windows shattered for miles. Floors trembled in houses across the city. And the Cliff House, perched directly above the blast, took the full punch of the concussion. Yet it stood. The frame shuddered. Glass failed. Plaster split. A few beams shifted, but the structure held. At first light crews came to sweep, reglaze, and patch. Within days the doors opened again. The story entered local legend at once. The night the ocean blew apart. The night the building nearly went with it. The night the world seemed to end, and then, with morning, resolved into bad luck, human error, and a barge of explosives in the wrong place at the wrong time. The soundscape of that night survives in testimony. First, the boom, deep, percussive, felt in the chest before heard in the ear. Then, a vacuumed quiet, the kind that follows violence. Next, gulls, startled and circling, their roosts emptied, the seals gone into deeper water. Finally, human voices, rising from hush to shout, taking stock, calling names, looking for the missing who were, in truth, only frightened and fumbling in the dark. In 2020, Maya sits in the empty dining room and runs a simple model on her laptop. She inputs the barge's approximate position, the estimated charge, the distance to the cliff. A red circle blooms on the screen, the blast radius. The cliff house sits on the edge of that circle, close enough to be hurt, far enough to live. 100 yards closer and the building collapses. 100 yards farther and it becomes little more than a loud night and a story. Margins. The cliff house's history would be written in margins, between survival and ruin, profit and loss, standing and falling. The dynamite night marked the first "we almost lost it" moment. It would not be the last. The ocean tested the palace, and the palace held. San Franciscans took that as proof. The cliff house belonged on that rock. It could withstand anything. The pact between building and cliff was sound. They were wrong. They would not learn how wrong for another 7 years. Chapter 4. Promise and Price. 7 years after the dynamite night, the cliff house still stood, and the man who would transform it and the entire shoreline around it was already sketching plans that would dwarf anything San Francisco had yet seen. Adolf Sutro came to San Francisco during the gold rush, but he made his fortune in silver. Engineer, inventor, entrepreneur. He conceived the Sutro Tunnel in Nevada, a vast drainage and ventilation artery for the Comstock lode mines. The tunnel took years to drive and made him rich beyond calculation. Yet wealth, for Sutro, was never the finish line. It was a lever. The question was what he would move with it. He looked west, toward the Pacific. He saw what everyone saw: sheer cliffs, hammering surf, seals on black rock. But he also saw something else: potential, opportunity. A chance to give San Francisco not just Boomtown swagger, not just a gold rush accident, but civic substance, attractions to rival anything in Europe or on the eastern seaboard. In 1881, Sutro bought the cliff house and the surrounding headlands. His vision was sweeping. He would build public baths, not mere pools, but an elaborate, glass-roofed complex that would be the largest on Earth. Steam-heated, multiple basins at staggered temperatures, seating for thousands, galleries for art, cabinets of taxidermy, restaurants. A complete Victorian pleasure ground perched above the ocean, reachable by streetcar for working families and by carriage for travelers with heavy purses. The comparison with the East Coast was intentional. In Newport, Rhode Island, the Vanderbilts and the Astors raised summer palaces, marble cottages that cost millions and hosted society for only a season. Cornelius Vanderbilt poured fortunes into the breakers. His wife Alice opened its doors to charity galas and ritual display, proof that wealth could underwrite culture as well as consumption. Those mansions announced permanence, stability, and almost hereditary continuity. San Francisco wanted grandeur in a California key, not private palaces for the few, but public marvels for the many. Less East Coast formality, more West Coast access, with just enough polish to declare that the city had arrived. Sutro grasped the mood. His baths would be democratic, an affordable gate, a spectacular setting, open to anyone who could pay a single quarter for admission. Dr. Eleanor Pierce, an architectural historian, sits in her office at the University of California, Berkeley, in 2019. Books plate the walls, photographs of Gilded Age facades spread across her desk. She leans forward, fingers laced, selecting each word. In Newport, money built palaces. In San Francisco, the ocean tested them. That's the core distinction. The Vanderbilts could erect the breakers and keep it pristine, because the Atlantic there is comparatively gentle, because their resources were near bottomless, because maintenance was just another budget line. On the Land's End cliffs, with that wind, those storms, that salt air chewing through metal and wood, maintenance wasn't a line item. It was an existential fight. Out there, nature always holds the last move. The Sutro baths opened in 1896, and the scale stunned the city. 6 saltwater pools fed by the tide, 1 freshwater pool, capacity for 10,000 bathers, galleries seating 7,000 spectators, glass roofing measured at more than 100,000 square feet. In all, roughly 3 acres under glass. Visitors could swim at tailored temperatures, watch exhibitions, stroll past taxidermied specimens in the museum wing, dine on site, then step next door to the Cliff House for a proper supper while the sun sank into the horizon. This was peak ambition. The complex turned a restaurant into a destination, into a declaration, that San Francisco belonged in the same breath as New York, Chicago, and Boston, cities with institutions, magnetism, and reasons for people to cross oceans. But promises on cliffs arrive with invoices. Costs mounted from the start. Salt air gnawed at iron. Wind pried at glazing. Ocean spray worked its way into every board. The dream demanded constant, costly attention. Sutro could bankroll the fight. The question was whether anyone after him would or could. Then, in 1894, while the baths were still rising, disaster struck the original Cliff House, the survivor of the dynamite shock, the landmark that had stood roughly 3 decades. Fire took it in a single evening. Frame, gingerbread skyline, and years of memory, gone to ash and twisted metal, smoke, climbing into the fog. Sutro watched from the headland and made his choice. He would rebuild. Not a replica, but something grander, something equal to the setting, something that felt, at last, permanent. From the cinders, drawings took shape. The new Cliff House would be spectacular. Chapter 5. The Gingerbread Palace Returns. Spectacular in Adolf Sutro's mind meant something precise. It meant Victorian exuberance hammered into timber and slate. It meant a building that begged for photographs, that lived on postcards, that travelers could spot in an instant and file under worth the trip. It meant gingerbread, not the modest original, but ornament pushed to the scale of a monument. The new Cliff House opened in 1896, the very year Sutro's baths next door debuted. 7 stories crowned the cliff. An 8-sided tower anchored the silhouette. A mansard roof in the Second Empire manner. Steep plains, dormer windows, dark slate that shone slick whenever the sea air turned everything wet, which was often, capped it all. The facade edged towards excess, bay windows thrust at confident angles, turrets, balconies, and carved brackets jostled for the eye. Paint in white and cream, with darker trim for discipline, tried, successfully on most days, to marshal the riot into coherence. From afar, especially in fog, it looked like a castle that had missed its stop in France and washed ashore on a California headland. Up close, it read as will made visible. This was Sutro's answer to the fire, to the ocean, to anyone who doubted that a great house could stand at Land's End without apology. Architecture as defiance. Inside, the ambition did not soften. The main dining hall seated hundreds beneath high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, costly, imported, and gloriously impractical beside salt spray, threw light across linen. Windows ran enormous, floor to ceiling in places, framing seal rocks and the unbroken Pacific. On clear days, that light was ablaze. On fog days, most days, the chandeliers did the heavy lifting, turning the room into a warm globe, while gray pressed its forehead against the glass. Menu prices matched the address. A full dinner ran to $1, no trifle for the time, but within reach for middle-class San Franciscans. Oysters were 25 cents the dozen. Wine came by glass or bottle, domestic or imported. The cooking was French-inflected American, the era's idea of elegance. Thick cuts, serious sauces, desserts that needed a steady hand and quiet air to keep their architecture upright. Crowds arrived immediately. Sunday traffic swelled. Streetcars rattled west, packed with families in best clothes. Summer weekends drew thousands. The Cliff House became the thing Sutro had sketched in his head, not merely a restaurant, but an institution. Not a stop, a destination. A place that defined San Francisco as surely as cable cars or the Bay itself. Weddings filled private rooms. Prize-fighters toasted wins at the bar. Veterans' posts held dinners. Politicians worked the tables for funds and favor. Guest books, now lost or dispersed, were said to carry important signatures. The specifics blur as they do, but the meaning is plain. The Cliff House mattered beyond trade. It signaled arrival. It declared culture and polish. It announced a West Coast that would not bow to the East. Postcards traveled the world. The image seldom changed. The seven-story tower, the intricate roofline, seal rocks shouldering the foreground, ocean to horizon. On the back ran notes in a dozen languages. Wish you were here. The loveliest view I've seen. You must visit San Francisco. The counts were concrete. 7 floors translated to roughly 40 rooms, the number drifting as spaces were repurposed. The tower stacked 5 levels. From the cliff base to the roofline rose about 80 feet. High enough for ships offshore to mark their approach, bold enough to act as a landmark for travelers coming up from the south. In the 1890s, carriages queued along the road, teams waiting while passengers ate, drank, and unspooled their gaze across water. By the early 1900s, automobiles began to appear. Temperamental, expensive, more symbol than transport, but clear signals that the future was pulling into the lot on schedule. Women cinched hats with long pins against the gale. Men kept to dark suits regardless of weather. Children, dressed like small adults in stiff collars and polished shoes, practiced stillness through long Sunday meals while waves pounded the rock below. Adolf Sutro died in 1898, 2 years after his palace opened. He lived to see it thrive. Lines at the door, postcards abroad, a vision affirmed. He did not live to see what came next, because the palace, the gingerbread monument, the 7-story dare flung at nature and doubt, was about to meet trials that dynamite, fire, and ordinary wear could not match. The city itself was about to heave. And when cities heave, buildings on cliffs do not negotiate. They fall, or they burn, or they stand. The Cliff House would do all three. Chapter 6, Quake, Fire, and a New Face. April 18th, 1906, 5:12 a.m. The San Andreas Fault tears near San Francisco. The shaking lasts roughly 45 seconds, and in those 45 seconds, the city's future bends in a new direction. Downtown collapses. Brick facades shear away. Wooden frames splinter. Gas lines rupture. Water mains fail. Within hours, fires begin. They burn for 3 days, eating through roughly 500 city blocks and leaving 250,000 people without homes, redrawing the map of one of America's great cities. At Land's End, about 7 miles from downtown, the Cliff House heaves and groans. Plaster splits, china shatters, chandeliers swing like pendulums. Yet the structure, Sutro's gingerbread palace with its bold tower and mansard crown, holds. The foundation, keyed into volcanic rock, soaks up shock. The timber frame flexes instead of snapping. When the earth stills, the building remains upright. Hurt? Yes. Windows blown, walls cracked, rooms in disarray. But standing. For one day, the Cliff House survives the quake that broke so much of San Francisco. Staff arrive, tally damage, sketch a repair plan. Reopening seems possible within weeks, perhaps months. The city will rebuild. The Cliff House will rise with it. The moment feels salvageable. Then the fire comes. September 7th, 1907, about 18 months after the earthquake. The cause remains murky. Accounts conflict, sources disagree, official paperwork was lost or never finished. What is certain, flame appears somewhere inside. Perhaps the kitchen, perhaps faulty wiring, perhaps something as ordinary as a stove left hot. Fire in a wooden labyrinth full of furniture, fabric, and alcohol does not wait for investigation. The blaze eats the palace in hours. 7 stories of Victorian bravado become 7 stories of flame. The tower turns into a torch. The mansard roof, dark slate, steep angles, gives way and falls inward. Bay windows burst from heat. Chandeliers slump and drip. The dining room where thousands had kept Sunday ritual fills with smoke, then ember, then nothing. Crowds watch from the beach. Others crowd the Sutro baths next door, faces to glass, as their landmark dissolves into columned smoke. Ferries at the Golden Gate mark a black plume rising off Land's End. One passenger, the author of the letter Maya later found in Mr. Alvarez's box, writes, "I watched it burn from the ferry. The smoke was black, then white, then black again. The building held its shape until it didn't. Then it was just a skeleton against the sunset. Then it was gone." The letter stops there, mid-thought, as if language refuses the task of naming what follows when beauty burns. The cliff house is gone. Again. First, the fire of 1894 that erased the original house. Now the fire of 1907 that takes Sutro's replacement. 2 fires in 13 years. 2 total losses. Reason would say, walk away. Admit the site is cursed, or at least admit that palaces on that particular cliff are a contest nature will not allow humans to win. Instead, they rebuild. The 3rd cliff house opens in 1909. This version is different. The Victorian exuberance is gone. So is the gingerbread skyline and the 7-story tower that burned so spectacularly. In their place, neoclassical restraint, clean lines, balanced bays, measured symmetry. 3 stories instead of 7. Concrete and steel, where wood once ruled. The architecture speaks for a city shaken and scorched that now insists on building carefully, permanently, soberly. The choices are intentional. In the aftermath, San Francisco rewrites its codes, embraces new materials, demands better fireproofing and structural logic. The Cliff House mirrors that shift. No longer a pure pleasure palace, it is a modern restaurant meant to endure, to resist earthquakes, to shrug off sparks, to face the salt wind that never quits. Inside, the mood is simpler, but not bare. Tile work replaces some of the elaborate plaster. The windows stay grand. The views stay operatic. The overall feel, though, is more assured, less hungry to dazzle, more confident in its place. Archival permit maps, now often animated in modern reconstructions, show approvals, contractor notes, and cost lines arcing upward. Total expense in today's money lands around $4 million. Not cheap, not reckless. Practical investment in something meant to last. Mr. Alvarez, decades later, shares his grandfather's memory. He worked there in the 1920s. He said you could smell the lemon oil on the banisters. They polished every day. The place gleamed. It felt solid, like it wouldn't burn again, like it couldn't. But solid, on a cliff above the Pacific, is always a temporary condition. Chapter 7. Playland. Summers and changing tastes, solid, lasted longer this time. The neoclassical cliff house stood through decades that rewired not only the building's rhythms, but the entire character of San Francisco's western edge. What had been a relatively isolated destination thickened into something larger, louder, more democratic, and decidedly more chaotic. Playland at the beach arrived in the 1920s, unfurling along Ocean Beach just south of the cliff house. It was not a single attraction, but dozens. Roller coasters, a carousel, a funhouse of distorting mirrors, shooting galleries, cotton candy shacks, saltwater taffy counters, penny and nickel arcades. The soundtrack never paused. The Big Dipper's screams, the carousel's calliope, barkers promising prizes, waves thundering beneath all that manufactured joy. Suddenly, the Cliff House had neighbors. The quiet poise the 1909 rebuild had tried to fix in place now competed with carnival clamor. Families who came for the rides stopped for lunch. Teenagers who came for thrills found beer if they looked old enough, or knew someone who would look old enough for them. The restaurant's identity turned fluid again, its tone dictated by clock and calendar. Sunday afternoons, respectable families, children in clean clothes, parents ordering complete dinners, behaving as Sutro had once imagined, treating the Cliff House as a destination worthy of Sunday manners and Sunday best. Saturday nights, an entirely different register, young, loud, less interested in vistas than in drinks, dancing, and the after-dark license the Cliff House had carried since its earliest chapters. That feeling that the continent's edge was also the edge of propriety. Prohibition arrived in 1920, and officially, the Cliff House poured no alcohol. Unofficially, as at thousands of addresses nationwide, the law bent, enforcement wavered, and anyone fluent in the right code could secure what they wanted. The reputation toggled yet again. Daytime respectability, shading toward speakeasy adjacency after dusk. The precise truth is hard to reconstruct. Records are patchy, memories self-protecting, and those who played along had reasons to blur details. What is documented is volume. Summer weekends pulled thousands to Playland, and a noticeable fraction drifted into the Cliff House. Streetcar headways, the gap between arriving trains, tightened to about 7 minutes at peak. You could board downtown, rattle out to the ocean, spend an afternoon at Playland, eat dinner at the Cliff House, and be home before dark. Total spend for fare, rides, and a meal, roughly $2, an approachable day out for working families and tourists alike. The 1930s brought depression, but the crowds did not vanish. If anything, cheap diversion became essential. Playland kept its lights on. The Cliff House adjusted. Smaller portions, lower prices, lunch specials that pulled people through the doors when wallets were thin. Carousel horses kept circling. The coaster kept climbing and dropping. The ocean kept crashing. In anxious years, consistency sold itself. The Second World War remade the scene again. Uniforms filled Playland and the Cliff House, sailors from the Presidio, soldiers bound for the Pacific. Young men on leave spending money they were not sure they would ever spend again. The atmosphere braided urgency with celebration and a hard edge of fatalism. Marriages happened fast. Goodbyes played out on the cliff. Photographs from the era show couples, service dress and formal wear, framed by the Cliff House windows, staring west toward a war most of them could not yet picture clearly. After 1945, families returned in vast numbers. The post-war boom meant leisure budgets, car keys, and a renewed optimism about futures that seemed steady again. The Cliff House thrived. Weekend reservations became necessary. The dining room filled with anniversaries, children's birthdays, graduation dinners. The constant was the view. Seal Rocks, the Pacific Line, fog most evenings, and, now and then, a clean break of sun to remind everyone why they had come. Then television slipped into living rooms in the late 1940s and early 1950s, and habits shifted by degrees. Why dress up and cross town when entertainment sat glowing at home? Why pay for dinner with a view when the couch was free and the shows were new each week? The crowds did not evaporate, but they thinned. Playland's peaks began a slow descent. The Cliff House felt it in reservation books, in Saturday turnover, in the buzz that had powered the room for decades. Tastes were moving. The city was moving. The question, quiet but insistent, was whether the Cliff House could move with them or drift into relic status. Beautiful, yes, but sidelined, holding its post at the edge of a world already shifting inland. Next door, at the Sutro Baths, an answer had already started to show itself. Chapter 8. The Water on Fire. The Sutro Baths had been failing for years before anyone said it out loud. Maintenance costs were astronomical. Storms cracked glass roof panels that cost thousands to replace. Salt water chewed through metal pipes without pause. Heating 6 enormous pools, even when fed by the ocean, burned fuel at a rate that made profit vanish. And attendance, once at its height in the early decades, slid steadily through the 1950s. Adolf Sutro had imagined the baths as a gift to San Francisco, a democratic pleasure palace where anyone could swim for a quarter. But gifts demand upkeep, and upkeep demands money. And by the 1960s, the money was gone. The turnstiles stopped in 1964. Plans surfaced to convert the place into an ice rink, to turn the pools into something solvable, something that did not fight salt, tides, and the Pacific's steady intent to reclaim what people had only borrowed. The conversion never came. On June 26, 1966, fire broke out in the Sutro Baths. The cause? Like so many fires on this headland, remains officially undetermined. The result is not in doubt. Timber within the glass shell burned hot. Roof panes burst under heat. The basins filled with ash and wreckage. By morning, Sutro's masterpiece, the largest indoor swimming facility ever built, roughly 3 acres under glass that had welcomed millions, was effectively gone. The smoke column was citywide news in real time. A black pillar rose into the wind. Staff from the Cliff House stepped outside to watch their neighbor go. Some remembered the fire of 1907 that had taken the gingerbread palace. The echo was impossible to miss. This shoreline eats buildings. Fire plays the instrument. The ocean writes the score. Salt that corrodes. Wind that spreads flame. Distance that slows response. The ruins were not erased. They were abandoned. Concrete outlines stayed, drifting full of sand and scrap. Storm surges sent tidal water slipping back in. Empty frames, stripped of glass, began framing sky. Nature started the long recovery, turning industrial bravado into something that felt ancient, as if the pools had always been there, and people had merely stumbled upon them. From next door, the Cliff House watched the change. The kitchen kept firing. The windows kept facing west. But the setting was different now. Playland was in decline, rides failing, parts not replaced, crowds thinning year after year. The baths were gone. The western rim of San Francisco, playground for nearly a century, was becoming something else, quieter, emptier, more plainly temporary. Ownership of the Cliff House shifted more than once. The Sutro family had long since sold. Successive operators tried successive recipes: white tablecloth dining, casual fare, event venue, tourist magnet. Some years penciled black, others bled red, all collided with the same facts. The building was costly to keep alive. The site was spectacular and isolated. Weather ran hostile. Fog, wind, a chill even in summer. Infrastructure aged hard. Salt air gnawed plumbing. Glazing demanded constant replacement. The foundation, keyed into volcanic rock on a retreating cliff, needed monitoring and periodic reinforcement. Storm damage arrived on schedule and never cheap. Tidal charts from the 1960s and 1970s show the Pacific taking cliff face by small bites, not theatrically. Inches a year, sometimes less, but always forward. Winter storms sped it up. King tides pushed higher than remembered norms. The rock that had posed as permanent proved negotiable. The measured distance from foundation to edge kept shrinking, documented, graphed, unnerving. Repair lines in the budget, in today's dollars, climbed into the hundreds of thousands each year. A new roof, about $500,000. Window packages, roughly $200,000. Foundation reinforcement, impossible to price with confidence, because the scope moved as the cliff moved. Dr. Pierce's Newport versus Pacific line fit tighter with every season. In Newport, a roof leak is a week's work. On a cliff, it is a landslide. There was no single catastrophe for the cliff house in these decades. There was erosion. Stone eroding in the literal sense, margins eroding in the financial sense, certainty eroding in the civic sense. The belief that this place would always be here, always matter, always fill tables for the view, thinned. Crowds still came, only fewer. The open sign still glowed, only over slimmer margins. The structure still stood, and everyone involved knew, even if they did not say it, that standing is not thriving, and thriving is not the same as sustainable. The cliff kept shrinking. The ocean kept waiting. And the cliff house kept plating dinners, kept switching on lights, kept acting as if forever were still up for negotiation. Until suddenly, it was not. Chapter 9. Quiet House, Loud Ocean. The end, when it finally came, was not theatrical. No fire, no quake, no midnight blast, just a virus, a lockdown, and economics colliding with a century and a half of strain. March 2020. COVID-19 shutters restaurants across California. The Cliff House closes like thousands of others, expecting to reopen in weeks, perhaps months. Weeks become months. Months stretch toward a year. The rooms sit still. The ocean keeps working. Salt air keeps gnawing. Wind keeps probing every window seal, every door frame, every seam in a structure that has always demanded constant care to stay alive. December 31st, 2020. The operators announced the closure is permanent. Lease talks with the National Park Service, owner of the land, have failed. Post-pandemic revenue projections cannot carry the maintenance burden. Final payrolls are cut. Staff receive termination notices. Keys trade hands. Doors click shut on a cold, fog-thick night. The same fog that had rolled in, indifferent to human calendars, for 157 years. Early in 2021, Maya Rodriguez arrives with permission to document. She is a preservation architect, hired to assess the building's condition and inventory what remains, to measure, photograph, and record before any decision about what comes next. Phone for photos, tape measure, notebook, a mask, partly for health protocols, partly because the dust is heavy. The dining room is empty, not stripped. Tables remain, chairs are stacked, windows are intact. The view is unchanged. Seal rocks, the Pacific line. Fog pressing its face to the glass. The silence is total. No kitchen clatter, no talk, no clink of glassware, no scrape of chairs. None of the ambient noise that filled this space for more than a century. Only her footsteps, only gulls outside, only the ocean, suddenly loud when everything else is gone. She measures methodically. Floor area. Approximately 18,000 square feet. Window count. 137. Maintenance needs? Extensive. The roof demands immediate work. Multiple leaks, corroded flashing, sections of the underlying structure compromised. The foundation shows stress fractures consistent with ground movement. Plumbing is outdated, some lines dating to the 1909 rebuild. Electrical is decades old, code compliant when installed, now needing a comprehensive upgrade to meet present standards. Numbers pile up in the notebook. Roof repairs, an estimated $600,000. Plumbing upgrades, roughly $300,000. Electrical, around $400,000. Foundation stabilization, contingent on geotechnical work, with early figures exceeding 1 million. Total to bring the building to safe, code-compliant operational condition, conservatively, $3 to $4 million, before the annual maintenance that runs well into 6 figures in good years. Mr. Alvarez meets her most days. Technically, he no longer works here. Practically, he cannot stay away. He sometimes brings coffee, stands at the windows, and tells the stories that never make official timelines. Table 12, northeast corner. The cleanest angle on Seal Rocks. In 1987, a man proposed there. The ring slipped, rolled under the table. He went to his knees. She laughed, said yes. They came back every anniversary for 20 years, requested table 12, ordered the same meals, and left holding hands. A blackout in 1995. Candles everywhere. Staff singing to keep the room buoyant. A child's birthday cake carried out with all candles lit. The entire dining room joined the song. Power returned on the final note. The family never forgot. A storm night in 2003, waves tall enough for spray to smack the lower panes. Staff and the few customers who had braved the weather stood at the glass, watching nature flex, feeling the building quiver with each heavy hit, feeling vividly alive in that safe, narrow distance from danger. Empty doesn't mean dead, Mr. Alvarez says in the quiet room. All those moments, they're still here. You just have to know where to look. In a third-floor storage room, Maya finds a postcard wedged behind a baseboard, dated 1934, penned in a child's careful hand. Dear Nana, we saw the sea. It's bigger than anything. Love, Dorothy. The picture is the gingerbread cliff house, the one that burned in 1907, still printed on souvenirs 3 decades after it vanished, because that is the version people carried in their minds. The palace that outlived itself in memory. She logs the postcard with the rest. Evidence that this place mattered. Evidence that empty is not the same as meaningless. Chapter 10. Lessons from the Gilded Age. The postcard Maya found, the child's note to Nana that the sea is bigger than anything, carries a truth preservation architects learn early. Buildings do not endure on merit alone. They endure because people decide they matter, because communities commit resources, because someone keeps asking hard questions about what is worth saving and what it actually costs to save it. Dr. Eleanor Pierce has built a career on those questions. Her field is Gilded Age architecture, the friction between spectacle and upkeep, between building grand and building to last. She has written at length about Newport's mansions, the breakers, Marble House, the elms, and the systems that keep them standing more than a century on. Cornelius Vanderbilt built fortunes, she says, seated amid photographs of both coasts. His wife, Alice, grasped something just as crucial. She opened doors. Not only literal doors to their house, but institutional doors. She worked with the Preservation Society, set maintenance protocols, and helped design funding structures meant to outlive any family's wealth or whims. The Newport model is instructive. When Gilded Age owners could no longer shoulder taxes and upkeep, when even Vanderbilt-level money bent under maintenance, the properties did not simply rot. The Preservation Society of Newport County stepped in, turned houses into museums, built revenue from tours and events, and, most importantly, created endowments calibrated to the real cost of maintaining specific buildings in a specific climate. The math is plain and unforgiving. A Newport mansion needs roughly $500,000 each year for baseline care, roof inspections, gutter cleaning, paint touch-ups, masonry repairs, climate control, pest management. Before accepting a property, the Society secures funding to match those tasks, then adjusts the endowment to the building's particular vulnerabilities. Place changes everything. Newport's Atlantic shore is comparatively gentle. Storms come. Salt is present. But compared with the Pacific cliffs at Land's End, Newport is forgiving. Dr. Pierce slides over her notes. Average wind at Newport, about 12 miles per hour. Average wind at Land's End, roughly 15 miles per hour, with gusts regularly topping 50. Annual precipitation at Newport, about 46 inches. At Land's End, roughly 23 inches, but with higher humidity and persistent fog, meaning more moisture exposure without the cleansing flush of heavy rain. The maintenance implications are stark. In Newport, roof tiles can last around 30 years, she says. On Pacific Cliffs, you are lucky to see 15. In Newport, exterior paint stretches 7 to 10 years. At Land's End, 3 to 5. Corrosion on metal, flashing, gutters, fasteners, runs at roughly double on the cliffs. And that is before we talk about the ground. The cliff, always the cliff. Newport's mansions sit on relatively steady earth. Foundations settle, but they do not migrate much. At Land's End, the edge moves. Geotechnical surveys from the past 5 decades show retreat. Some years, inches, storm years, feet. Averaged over time, about 6 inches each year, half a foot of cliff receding annually, drawing the ocean incrementally closer to the cliff house foundation. On a whiteboard, Dr. Pierce sketches a comparison. 2 columns, Newport and Land's End. Line items, roof maintenance, gutter replacement, exterior paint, window sealing, foundation monitoring, emergency repairs. The Newport column lands near $500,000 a year. The Land's End column, for a building of similar size, pushes beyond $1 million. That is just maintenance, she underlines. Not improvements, not upgrades, not making it better. That is the price of not getting worse, the cost of standing still where the ocean is actively repossessing its edge. The Newport lesson is not only financial, it is structural. Governance matched to reality. The Preservation Society preserves buildings by first preserving the systems that preserve buildings. It designs boards to outlast individuals. It builds endowments to throw off income in perpetuity. It writes protocols that privilege the next 50 years over next month's headlines. You do not save a building with good intentions, Dr. Pierce says. You need specific dollars in specific accounts earning specific returns to fund specific tasks on a schedule. You need engineering reports every 5 years. You need climate data driving choices. You plan for storms that have not happened yet, but will. By 2021, the question facing the cliff house is whether anyone will build those systems, pledge those resources, and make those long horizon decisions. The building can be saved. The open question is whether it will be, whether the community values it enough to match the ocean's persistence. The numbers are not coy. The cliff keeps shrinking, the maintenance line keeps climbing. The decision keeps approaching, fund the work properly, or watch another ruin form, another romantic failure at the continent's edge. Chapter 11. What we choose to save. The math sharpens the problem, but numbers alone cannot answer the deeper question. Why fight to save this building instead of letting it drift into ruin beside the Sutro Baths? Another monument to ambitious failure. Why keep wrestling the Pacific for another decade, another century, when the ocean has infinite patience and humans live by budgets? Leila Sutro, great-great-granddaughter of Adolf Sutro, sits in her Richmond district home with a family album open on the table. Photographs from the 1890s show her ancestor near the cliff house and his beloved baths, confident, prosperous, intent. Later, pages chart aging, struggle, fire. The album itself is thick, yet incomplete, missing pages, removed prints, stories softened or clipped. Not every heirloom survives, she says quietly. My family learned that. Adolf built so much: the tunnel, the baths, the cliff house, the gardens, the railway. Most is gone. The tunnel remains, but with a different purpose. The baths are ruins. The railway is long erased. You cannot keep everything. You choose symbols. You decide which piece carries enough meaning to justify the cost of care. For Layla, the cliff house carries her great-great-grandfather's democratic instinct. Spectacular beauty should not be gated for the wealthy. Working families deserve access to the extraordinary. He could have built a private mansion. People urged it. Instead, he built a public restaurant. He built baths a quarter could buy. He treated beauty as a public good, not a private toy. That philosophy is worth saving, even when the buildings keep failing. Community meetings begin in late 2021. The National Park Service, which owns the land, hosts sessions at the Fort Mason Center and invites stakeholders to imagine futures. The room is more varied than anyone expects. Teachers who bring fourth graders to Land's End. Surfers who use the Cliff House lot as their launch. Museum professionals considering interpretation. Historians, architects, old-line San Franciscans who remember family dinners. Recent arrivals who have only seen the building closed yet feel its pull. One teacher speaks about field trips, gold rush lessons, westward expansion, how cities rise and molt. The Cliff House makes it tangible, she says. Photographs help, but standing there, staring at seal rocks, feeling the wind, history turns physical. The past stops being names and dates. It becomes places and choices about what to build and where. A surfer in his 60s talks about sunsets and orientation, seasons, tides, the way the building functions as a fixed point when you are moving water. You are past the break, you glance back, you find the Cliff House. You know exactly where you sit on the coast. It is navigation. It is part of the landscape now, even though people made it. Take it away, and something essential goes missing. Something you do not realize you rely on until it is gone. A museum director sketches a living museum model, not velvet ropes and whispers, but a working space. A cafe with rotating exhibits, an oral history booth where visitors record their Cliff House stories, programming on coastal erosion, seismic engineering, and the economics of place, a building that teaches its own life while serving the public, useful, open, alive. The conversations stretch across multiple sessions. Friction appears, authenticity versus accessibility, preservation versus adaptation, competing visions. Yet a core agreement forms. Whatever happens should honor Adolf Sutro's public spirit. The space must serve people, not private privilege. And the story told must be honest about failure as well as triumph, about fires and closures and the grind of upkeep, not only postcards and celebrity names. A 5-phase plan takes shape. First, stabilize now, stop leaks, secure the foundation, arrest further decay. Second, interpret, build exhibits, collect oral histories, frame the narrative clearly. Third, reopen in a small way. A cafe, a compact museum, public access to the views. Fourth, endow. Create the funding architecture Dr. Pierce described, the Newport logic adapted to Pacific reality. Fifth, teach. Use the Cliff House as a case study in preservation, in coastal management, in the art of building at the edge. Visitor projections are modest by design. Weekdays, hundreds, weekends, thousands. School groups in spring and fall, tourist waves in summer. Revenue from cafe service, event rentals, modest museum admission, grants from preservation organizations, donations from people who remember family dinners, anniversaries, proposals at table 12. Nothing in the plan forces the sea to care. The ocean ignores business models and sentiment. But for the first time since the 2020 closure, there is a framework, a path from silence to institution, from locked doors to lived-in space. A deliberate choice emerges. Refuse another picturesque ruin. Refuse another parable of grand hopes meeting pacific indifference, and attempt something harder, a symbol of what we choose to save and why. Chapter 12. The edge that holds symbols require work. Philosophy requires funding. Plans drafted in community rooms must be translated into permits, engineering reports, and contractor bids. In early 2023, the Cliff House begins that translation. Dawn comes slowly to Land's End, usually as fog. Gray light sifts through gray air. The boundary between sea and sky blurs until the horizon is more suggestion than line. But on this particular March morning, the fog lifts early. Sun breaks through. The Pacific shifts from pewter to blue to a color almost Mediterranean, one of those rare hues that explains in an instant why people build on cliffs despite every rational argument against it. Trucks roll up with contractor logos on the doors, crews shoulder drills, saws, levels, and bundles of materials along the path. First priority, water management. Cliff drains must be cleared, rerouted, reinforced. Water is the quiet killer here, rarely by flood, mostly by patience. Rain weeps into hairline cracks, fog condenses in wall cavities. Salt spray chews from without, while trapped moisture works from within. Control the water, and you have already solved half the problem. Carpenters follow, a slow procession with pry bars and moisture meters. Window frames and door sills that looked sound at a distance confess their truth up close. Rot in corners, joints separating where they should be tight, paint that decorates, but no longer protects. Sections are chalked for replacement. Not everything. Not a wholesale rebuild. Targeted interventions at weak points where nature has gained ground and must be pushed back. Inside, Maya Rodriguez moves room to room with clipboard and camera. She photographs before work, during work, and after, because documentation is the spine of preservation. Future hands will want to know what remained original, what was restored, what was replaced outright. Honesty in preservation means admitting that buildings change. Caring for them requires altering them. Perfect authenticity is impossible for anything that stands long enough to need repair. Most mornings, Mr. Alvarez appears. He has been hired as a historical consultant. Part-time, modest pay, but the badge lets him walk in legitimately, to be present for the building's next life. He watches crews pin drains into the cliff face and remembers storms that turned the lot into a shallow lake. He watches carpenters lift sills and remembers polishing those same rails decades ago. The place is, all at once, the house he knows by heart and a house he sees anew. Its bones exposed, its vulnerabilities visible, its survival revealed as both more precarious and more remarkable than it felt during the routine of service. One morning he brings a framed artifact, the 1,907-letter Maya found in his box, now cleaned and preserved behind glass. He hangs it at eye level near the entrance, where visitors will meet it as soon as they step inside. A letter that stops mid-sentence, a witness to the gingerbread palace burning, watched from a ferry. A capsule of the site's central truth, beauty and destruction, permanence and loss, the human urge to build and nature's patient correction. The windows breathe again. That is how the contractors describe it. Properly sealed and detailed, they allow the building to shed moisture instead of trapping it, to flex with temperature changes without stress. Breathing is not metaphor here. It is engineering. In coastal climates, a building that cannot breathe does not die in a blaze. It dies quietly from the inside. Months pass, work continues. Not a dramatic metamorphosis, but steady advance. Foundations are reinforced, roof membranes repaired and flashings replaced, drains capture and root water as drawn, Electrical and life safety systems are upgraded. The building is not new, will never be new again, but it is sound. It is viable. It is ready for whatever comes next. Cafe, museum, gathering space, a symbol of what communities can save when they match the ocean's persistence with their own. The closing thought is not Mr. Alvarez's. It is Maya's. From her final report, the document that will guide the next phase. Palaces can stand on cliffs if people stand with them, not once. Not only in a surge of crisis or sentiment, but continuously. Every year, every storm, every budget cycle, every generation that inherits the choice. The ocean waits, it always waits. Yet this morning, sun on the water, cruise on the cliff, the building breathing as it has not in years, the waiting feels less like doom and more like negotiation. The edge holds, for now, which is all it has ever done and all it can ever promise.